Hey there, and welcome to my first House of the Dragon video. And yes, as you may know, recently we saw the long-awaited release of the first episode of House of the Dragon, the prequel series to Game of Thrones that draws on the in-universe history book Fire and Blood as its source material. And having read Fire and Blood, and having enjoyed it, and having watched the final season of Game of Thrones and being less than impressed, I do have to say I was a little bit apprehensive about what was going to happen here. Was I about to see a book I enjoyed get massacred in its screen adaptation? Was the rot that afflicted the final years of Game of Thrones still present in this adaptation? How different was the creative team? Were they going to fall into any of the same mistakes? So yeah, those were my major fears, and my hype levels, as a result, were pretty low. And then the trailers started coming out, and like the fickle little fool I am, I was suddenly, completely, and utterly hyped up for House of the Dragon. It seemed like it was going to be awesome. And the closer we got to that release date, the more hyped I became. Until we got to that release of the first episode, and it was good. And I'm not sitting here shook that it was the greatest thing I've ever seen, and I'm not sitting here ranting and raving that it was terrible and ruined the heart of the source material. It was just good. It was fun, and it had some great acting, some great world building, some great visual design choices, good music. It was just a lot of fun, and it really harkened back to those early days of Game of Thrones where it didn't feel quite so action movie. To me, this episode felt very much like season 1 of Game of Thrones, but with a way bigger budget. And that's something I found to be quite exciting and a bit nostalgic too. Yeah, there were some things I didn't really like, but at the same time, I don't necessarily think the things I didn't like were objectively bad, but probably came more down to my personal preferences. But yes, with all that being said, let's jump into the first episode titled The Heirs of the Dragon. So we start off the episode with a little bit of exposition and a flashback, where we learn that in the final days of the old king Jaehaerys I, who is the grandson of Aegon the Conqueror, he found himself with a lack of viable male heirs, or at least sons, largely due to the deaths of his two eldest children, Aemon and Balon, whilst the only other living son he had, Aegon, was serving as an archmaester of the Citadel, so he wasn't in contention for the throne anyway. Thus, a great council was called at Harrenhal, where the lords of the Seven Kingdoms were called upon to take a vote for Princess Rhaenys, the daughter of the eldest son Aemon, or Viserys, the eldest son of the second-born son, Balon. So, essentially, which line would serve the better kingdoms better? Rhaenys, who's married to Lord Corlys Velaryon of Driftmark, who's one of House Targaryen's direct vassals in the Crown Lands, and who are the traditional choice for intermarriage when Targaryens don't have any sisters to do the old incest thing with, and who have become very rich and powerful due to their current lord trading with the Far East and bringing back many luxury goods rarely ever seen in Westeros before. And at this stage of the game, unless they've changed up the timing, she should have two children, Laena and Laenor, who would one day follow his mother as king. Or on the other hand, there's Viserys, who's married to his cousin, another granddaughter of the old king, Aemma Arryn, and I think at this stage he'd have his daughter by now, who we later see, and he has his brother, Daemon. So his line is also decently secure, especially as Daemon is also married at this stage, although they have no children and they hate each other, so good luck there. Regardless, Viserys is chosen largely because he has a penis, and that's how things are done. The old king looks kind of smug, Rhaenys is sad, and a family rift is created within the House of the Dragon. And I liked this scene. It introduced our main players, it explicitly told us how they're related, it set up some pretty important themes that'll be present within the story, largely that women are overlooked and are really worth nothing to those that have power in this society with their rights and wishes trampled over regularly, and that ultimately, the man rules the roost. Also, side note, Harrenhal looks a lot better here than it did in Game of Thrones. So it makes me wish that they had this crazy budget back then, but yeah, moving on. We then skip ahead to the 9th year of the reign of King Viserys, and so it looks like they actually did scramble up the timeline a little bit, because these events, which in the books happen in like his 4th or 5th year of his reign, are now the 9th. So I'm guessing the council was pushed back in the timeline, and potentially all those children I mentioned before weren't even born yet. Maybe Rhaenyra is born, and the future queen was pregnant with one of her dead sons, but yeah. And honestly, I think I'm fine with that. I know some people wouldn't be, but if it helps them tell the story they want to tell, go for it. And then on top of that, we get some context for how long before Daenerys' birth all of this takes place. 172 years, just in case viewers are confused. And honestly, that will actually probably be helpful for a lot of people who might completely miss the point and think that the king is Dany's dad or something like that, and then be confused by everything else that happens. It is sad, but this kind of stuff is necessary. We then get a really beautiful shot of a dragon, Syrax, flying through the sky above King's Landing, and there's nothing really to say about this, other than the cinematography is on point. The dragon looks great, the clouds looked great, the shots were great, the city itself, beautiful, seriously incredible. And also the theme that plays as she flies past the Red Keep is just perfect. And for some reason, a nostalgic tear literally sprang to my eyes when I was rewatching to make this video. The composer, he is truly magnificent. He's made so many iconic themes by this point. Anyway, we then get some cool world building as Syrax lands and interacts with the Dragon Keepers, who I guess speak to her in Valyrian to calm her down and prepare her to be taken into the Dragon Pit. And I really liked the outside design of the Dragon Pit itself. Looked really incredible, especially when you compare it to the ruins we see in Game of Thrones. It's nice to see that progression. Rhaenyra then banters with her Kingsguard, who, according to the wiki, is Lord Commander Harold Westerling, and it's nice to see some of the minor characters actually going to have some relevance to the story this time round. And then Rhaenyra hops into her carriage with Alicent Hightower, who seems to have been aged down for this adaptation, as I think she's supposed to have been almost a decade older if I've got my facts right. And they're seemingly very good friends, which makes me kind of sad, because like everything in this universe, it's all going to turn to shit. Moving on though, we then have a really well constructed sequence of the carriage riding through King's Landing, and just everything about this was well done once again. The cinematography on point, the set design, the music, the shot selection. Loved it. And it's really obvious they've put a lot of effort into making the show look incredible. I mean, time will tell if they put in the same effort in terms of the narrative flow and the character development, but so far it's good signs. Also, the Red Keep looks so damn epic. Leagues ahead of what we saw in Game of Thrones, at least in my opinion. Anyway, the pair then head inside and find Rhaenyra's mother, who's in the end stage of her latest pregnancy, and who tells her that she stinks of dragon and she needs to take a bath. So if Rhaenyra smells just from that one flight, imagine how bad Daenerys probably used to smell, as she seems to have always had her dragons with her pretty much constantly. Whew, poor Jon Snow. And here, we double down on that motif that women are very much the second-class citizens of this world, even the most powerful women in the realm, as it's made clear that all these attendants, the maesters, the midwives, they're here for the potential heir, not the queen. And then this is doubled down on again in her conversation with Rhaenyra, saying that her daughter has a royal womb, and basically telling her that her future is as a broodmare, not as a warrior. And that's pretty bleak. We then get our first look at the king and his small council, where they're sitting around listening to the king make jokes, as opposed to making decisions on the future rule of the realm. And Lord Velaryon seems to think that this is bullshit, and thinks they should actually get some shit done. So he brings up that the free cities of Lys, Myr and Tyrosh have banded together to form a triarchy, and are currently conquering the Stepstones, a set of islands in the narrow sea between Essos and Westeros. And whilst the king thinks this is good news as they're clearing out pirates, Corlys finds it troubling, as it gives the Triarchy a future opening to strike against Westeros and seal up trade routes. But as he's seemingly incompetent, the king is not convinced. 3 rich, powerful and influential city-states with big armies band together, and he thinks nothing of it. Pfft, what a wonderful king we have. And of course, he doesn't actually take anything seriously, it seems, as he cuts off Corlys to scold Rhaenyra for being late, as she's his cupbearer, and he wants some wine. Plus, the council also wants Daemon to come to the council to give a report on the expenses of the city watch, because apparently maintaining law and order in a city famous for its brutal crimes and violence is a bad thing. And then on top of this, these dumb fucks want to start talking about a tournament being held for the upcoming birth of Viserys' supposed son, because that doesn't just feel like they're jinxing things, doesn't it? Feels like Robert's small council from season 1. We have lots of important tasks, so let's throw a party instead. We then cut to Rhaenyra entering the throne room with the Lord Commander to find her uncle sitting on the Iron Throne. They banter in High Valyrian, which I did enjoy, and then he starts on his quest of flirting with her and grooming her, which I did not enjoy. Yes, it's for the story, but it just made me feel so uncomfortable. But I did like that it did kind of feel off-putting. I really hope they don't lose sight of that and then try to turn this into some romantic type of story, because it really doesn't feel like it should be. He's clearly using her. We then see a scene of Viserys getting treatment for a back sore that just won't heal, with the maester suggesting cauterization and suggesting that his stress about the upcoming birth is what's affecting him, and thus slowing his body's ability to heal. And honestly, I'm not a doctor, so I'm not sure if that's a reasonable medical opinion. But in lore, this dude is well known for his bad health due to too much eating and too much drinking. I always assumed he was a bit of a fat ass, but maybe that's going to come later. Either way, I doubt it's just a cut, like he keeps saying. We then move on to an ominous and emotional scene where Viserys speaks to his wife while she's bathing to seek some relief from her pregnancy pains. And this scene, well, it shows that Viserys too has some prophetic dragon dreams like many of his house, with his dream telling him he's going to have a son who will wear the Conqueror's crown and bring about a new era for Westeros. And of course, this is all just setting him up for that big fall later in the episode. His wife goes on to tell him that this, no matter what, is her last pregnancy. That she can't keep going like this, having a cradle death, stillbirths, miscarriages, and that the grief is becoming far too much for her to bear. And yeah, this scene was really, really sad. And it was nice to see a husband who actually seems to love and cherish his wife and care about her feelings. Like, yeah, he doesn't come out of this looking too good later in the episode, but at least for now, let me dream. And then we have Daemon and the Gold Cloaks to hype us up, as he whips them up into a frenzy and tells them to go out and bring order to the city. And yeah, his speech was great. Matt Smith's really doing a great job as Daemon, and the contrast between his personality here and when he was with Rhaenyra is really interesting. You can really see how layered a character he is already, and that's good, he needs to be. That contrast, the two sides of his personality, they really do play an important role to the story, and I'm glad they're not shying away from that. And so, the Gold Cloaks brutalize the criminal element of the city, cutting off hands of thieves, gelding rapists, and then beheading murderers, and filling up a cart filled with body parts. Oh, and also just beating the shit out of vagrants, I guess. And I know this is meant to make you feel like he's a bit dangerous and almost an antagonistic character, but honestly, he is kind of right in that the city does need a bit of a firmer hand. But yeah, it doesn't look like they set up a fair system of trial either, and they just said, that's a thief, that's a raper, that's a murderer, and off with the body parts. So I'm not sure about that, it feels like a bit of a kangaroo court, but okay. Yeah, now that I think more deeply on it, it was probably a bit much, but he is right that the city needed law reform. And it's a bit ridiculous that the Hand of the King is somehow sitting there thinking that this is a bad thing. Like, I get that he hates Daemon, but he just comes across as so slimy here. How does anyone believe this guy? And I also loved how they really just captured what a peacekeeping appeaser the king is. He doesn't want anybody to be angry, so he doesn't take a firm position, and he gets talked in circles by both the Hand and his brother. And then Daemon loses a little bit of goodwill in my books as he describes his wife, Rhea Royce, as his bronze bitch, and says that men in the Vale like to have sex with sheep. How nice. And then he mocks the death of Otto's wife. Whew. So yeah, that's that morally grey side of things starting to creep back into his personality, I guess. He is an arsehole, and I'm really loving how you don't ever really know what to expect with him. The king then scolds Daemon, he leaves, and the king then immediately backflips and says that Daemon's new city watch might actually be a good thing for the city as a whole. And then it wouldn't be the world of Ice and Fire without a random sex scene appearing out of nowhere. And here we have Daemon taking Mysaria from behind, and then seemingly finishing prematurely or not finishing at all, because it just ain't right. Because he is salty that he got scolded. Also, why are all the prostitutes watching? Do they seriously find him so handsome that they can't resist watching through the cracks of the door? Or is the allure of him being a prince that they find so irresistible? But anyway, his prostitute, paramour, lover, she tells him that the king won't replace him, and then cuddles him to bring some comfort. And so that's an unexpectedly wholesome brothel scene, all things considered. We then move on to the tourney, where it's been announced that the Queen has gone into labour, and we meet our future Lord Commander of the King's Guard, Sir Criston Cole, who is whooping ass in the lists. And this jousting? Damn, it's impactful. A big step up from Game of Thrones tournament scenes in Season 1. We then also see that there is still, after 9 years, a lot of discontent in the choice of Viserys as king over Rhaenys, with the Baratheon knight, her cousin, calling her the queen who never was, a deliberate swipe at Viserys, and then asking for her favour, and then getting destroyed by Sir Criston in pretty embarrassing fashion. Prince Daemon then makes his way out into the field, and is given a choice of various different knights whom he may joust against. And he, of course, chooses Otto Hightower's eldest son, Gwaine. And after one tilt, I'm pretty sure Daemon just outright cheats, hitting the horse instead of the rider. I'm pretty sure that's against the rules. And he sends the dude flying, and he could have crippled him if the horse had fallen on him. So, yeah, close call for Sir Gwaine, except for his face. Jesus, what happened to his face? Ugh. And so now we can add very unsportsmanlike conduct to Daemon's list of qualities. He then doubles down on humiliating Otto by asking for his daughter's favour and receiving it, literally moments after nearly killing his eldest son. Whew, Daemon has no chill at all, and Otto is just taking a relentless barrage of L's today. And then we head into perhaps the most uncomfortable and gut-wrenching part of the episode, where it's revealed that the Queen's baby is breech or something like that, and isn't coming out. that her labour is stalled and the maesters believe she will not survive, and that the child will die unless they give her an emergency C-section. A C-section, that I might add, she doesn't seem to want, but that Viserys proceeds with. And this scene was just too much for me. I had to look away and block my ears on my rewatch. And I mean, the first time around was pretty fucked up too. And meanwhile, for some reason, the big brain dipshits fighting in the tournament are just outright killing each other. Like, what the actual fuck, man? That's against the rules. The Mountain does this in Season 1 of Game of Thrones, and it's considered very illegal. But now everybody's acting that this is all just well and good. Oh, they've never fought in a war before, so let's just let them kill each other. What? Anyway, though, back to the birth. Long story short, he forces the C-section, and she dies. And the baby also dies. Completely and utterly traumatizing. I am sorry to any pregnant women that had to watch that scene. For me, it's right up there alongside Oberyn's haunting screams as he gets his head popped like it's a grape by the Mountain. But anyway, since we've established that the king is kind of weak-willed and easy to manipulate, and I feel like since nobody likes Daemon, it felt like the maester kind of implied that the queen was going to die no matter what to ensure the potential heir would survive. I mean, he never explicitly says that only the child could live. He just says they both won't live. That one of them might need to be sacrificed. But then when they talk about the sacrifice, immediately the maester talks about how to save the son, like it's a foregone conclusion. And on top of that, the queen doesn't want this. She wants to live, to raise her daughter. And she begs him to stop. Fuck the king, seriously, and fuck the maester, and fuck everybody. So she dies, and so does the baby. So she died for literally nothing. And then this smooth-brained dipshit king is going to name his daughter Heir, which he could have done back when his wife was still alive. And then he's going to remarry anyway, and he's going to have sons who are then passed over for the elder daughter, contravening the previous precedent that gave him the throne over Rhaenys in the first place. Dude's just not having a good run. And then he sets the stage for the Dance of Dragons, the almost fall of his house, just because of his weakness and his bad decisions. Like, I know he's likable, but also he's just so hateable because he's so weak. Daemon's right. And speaking of Daemon, whilst this is all going on, he gets defeated by Criston Cole in the joust, which then turns into an impromptu duel, which Cole also wins. And then he gets the princess's favour, and she stares at him all enamoured. And honestly fair, dude's handsome, and he just defeated one of the best warriors in the kingdom. Twice. I fully understand. But back to the king. He mourns his wife, and then his son gurgles a little bit, and we cut straight to the funeral for both of them because, all of this was just pointless, and the funeral's sad. Shit, even Daemon, heartless Daemon, who was set to be displaced as heir, is clearly upset with everything that's happened. So it adds even more complexity to his character. He's selfish, but also he has some empathy. He then comforts and supports Rhaenyra through the funeral, and actually seems genuinely sad watching his sister-in-law and nephew burn on the funeral pyre. And then the small council immediately calls an emergency session to try and convince Viserys to revoke his status as his heir and place Rhaenyra there instead. But of course, Viserys says, no, he's my brother and we stick together. And then he yells at Otto and at the Grand Maester, as they're the two that really pushed the issue quite hard, and the others either stayed quiet or supported Daemon. And of course, Daemon's listening into this and hears his brother lend him his support and love. And then here is where Otto just loses me completely. Before, I could kind of understand where he was coming from. He doesn't trust Daemon and he wants to do the best for the realm. But then in comes Alicent to his chambers, looking upset, reminded of her own mother's death, and is told by her father to go and lend the king comfort in his chambers and to wear one of her mother's dresses. And if that isn't vomit-worthy, then I don't know what is. Pimping out your daughter? Jesus! In this adaptation, she seems to be the same age as Rhaenyra, who is what, 13, 14 here? I mean, if she was any older, surely we would have heard some discussions of a betrothal or something, right? At least some discussions, but we know that comes in later episodes. So here, she's probably just on the cusp of puberty. And Alicent is probably a similar age, maybe a tiny bit older, and is now being sent to slowly seduce a grieving widower who, well, I don't know how old he's supposed to be in this timeline, but he's a fair bit older than her, that's for certain. Gross. And he's a friend of her daughter. Double gross. And that whole scene where she talks to him whilst he's playing with his miniatures is just so uncomfortable. Especially since we know that she succeeds and bears his children. This kingdom, it just ain't right. There's so little autonomy for women at all. It's so sad and gross and creepy. in a way that Game of Thrones never really achieved. So I think it's good writing, to be honest. But meanwhile, in a brothel, Daemon has thrown a party for his gold cloaks and supporters where he makes an ill-advised speech about the king's late son, Balon, calling him the heir for a day, pretty much mocking and celebrating his death. Now, they don't actually show him say this to retain some ambiguity of whether he was laughing about it or was genuinely upset and trying to cope, but regardless, his brother, for once, puts his foot down and renounces him as his heir, instates Rhaenyra, and banishes him back to the Vale and his bronze bitch. But not before the brothers lay down some pretty hard truths. Viserys tells Daemon that he has no allies except for him, and yet all he's ever done is break faith with him. Simultaneously, Daemon states that Viserys is too weak-willed, that he's ruled by Otto Hightower, when it should be the other way around, and that he needs Daemon because he can't handle it himself. We then move on to a scene which pretty much sets up the reason Aegon invaded Westeros to begin with. A secret passed from king to heir, and now that Viserys is going to pass to Rhaenyra, that the White Walkers are coming back one day. And I gotta ask, how did the old King Jaehaerys, who was the third son of his father, a father who suddenly died, and whose brother was usurped and murdered by their uncle, how could he have possibly found this out? If it's just a secret for the heir alone. Did Maegor the Cruel leave his nephew a letter? I mean, I could accept Maegor the Cruel knowing, as Aegon probably told his sister wives about his dream, and therefore Visenya told Maegor, because, he's her only son. But I doubt the rest of them would know. So already, it stretches credibility that Viserys would even know this. But okay. But the bright spot from this scene is that he at least apologizes for being a less than good father and promises to do better by her. And then we cut to the lords swearing their fealty to Rhaenyra, whilst Daemon takes his mistress off on Dragonback. I think it's safe to say that he's not going back to his wife like he was told to. And then Rhaenyra becomes Princess of Dragonstone to end the episode. Whew, that was a big one. And whilst it was a bit graphic, and for me, some things didn't make a lot of sense, I very much enjoyed it. And I'm looking forward to the next episode. But that being said, these were just my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of the episode? You like it? Hate it? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.